I know a lot of you want BYU to be a Big 12 contender this year, but I got a guy who's got his doubts.
You are Locked On College Football with Spencer McLaughlin, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in this, the greatest sport on planet Earth. Oh, BYU was such a fun story. Are they just going to be someone that fades out next year? We'll talk about that with Jake Hatch here of Locked On BYU. We'll stay in the Big 12. Cam Rising is leaving Utah, but he's not going to the NFL, and playoff changes are not on the way. This episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So, Jake Hatch of Locked On BYU Cougars. This was a great story. It was awesome. They kept proving me wrong. BYU fans and I think we're cool after I kind of faded them coming into this season. I think we are on good footing now. But how are you feeling about their prospects of being a Big 12 title contender this fall?
I think the biggest thing with BYU is they did everything that we expected them to do and more. Because I said before the season, I thought getting to a bowl game, that'd be good enough for BYU. I was like, okay, get to a bowl game, show you make some progress in the Big 12. Never did I expect an 11-win season, Spencer. And that was absolutely awesome to watch them do what they did. And the nice part was there are pieces returning here for BYU to have them in place to make another run at it next year. We'll see if they can pull it off. But they've got a lot of pieces coming back. So it feels like in some ways they arrived ahead of schedule.
There's a big component when you assess conference championship landscapes of who's coming back. I mean, you look around the rest of the Big 12, and I can see Colorado being good, but I don't think they can be as good as they were this season. No Shedeur Sanders, no Travis Hunter. You lose the Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year, your two-way superstar and Heisman Trophy guy. I mean, they were so dependent on those two guys. I just haven't gotten my head around to the idea that, yeah, they're just going to be at the same level next year. It doesn't mean they can't be respectable, but I don't think they're going to be 9-3 again. But for BYU, are those returners enough to be at the top of the Big 12, which I think, once again, Jake, is just going to have a bunch of good teams. I don't know that there's a great one out there. I love what Dillingham is doing at Arizona State, but I don't know that that's, yet a dominant team going into next year.
Yes, I agree with you. I think at the top of the conference, it'll be a bunch of teams that are going to be right about the same level. And I think BYU's in that mix for sure. The nice part is you have your quarterback, your running back, you've got some of your offensive linemen back. The wide receiving core should be back intact, Spencer. So offensively, BYU's in very good shape. Defensively, there's a little bit of retooling. You added a defensive tackle from Utah, Keanu Tanavasa, who figures to make that defensive line as stout, if not better than it was a year ago. All three of your star linebackers are back for BYU from this past year's squad. So, and the secondary, that you lose both your starting corners, but BYU's confident in the young pieces they have coming up to fill those gaps there. So I think on its head, BYU has the pieces to make another run at it. And the way that BYU played that complementary style of football this year, that should very much be the same way they go about things next year.
You mentioned that defensive tackle addition from Utah came with a little buzz, little extracurricular there. Any thoughts on that particular matter? For those who don't know, essentially there was an accusation made that BYU is doing stuff behind the scenes that's shady and not great, to which I honestly would say, who isn't, man? Like, I mean, seriously, it's college football. Who is it? But is that what you felt it was as well?
Here's the thing. This is a young man who he had made very public statements about guys leaving Utah and essentially telling them, I'm here to stay. And then I think that all of a sudden he started getting some of those overtures that come in. And I'm not saying that BYU contacted him directly, but we all know this, Spencer, that there are middlemen, whether it's your high school coach, an agent, your own parents, whoever it might be, can have contact with different schools. And as soon as you start hearing, hey, if you're interested in maybe jumping, this might be the amount of money that's available to you. You know what? This is what college football is. And I know that BYU is supposed to be this high and mighty program that's above the fray and all this stuff. If BYU wanted to get down in the mud and win a recruiting battle of that magnitude, good on him, because I can tell you, Keanu Tanavasa, he is the type of defensive tackle BYU needs to see this defense take another step forward, even though it was very, very good this past year.
Spring ball, of course, a while out, but not as far as we might think, because March Madness is like 2 months away, which is a glorious thought, of course. But heading into spring football, Jake, where are the biggest questions for this BYU team? Because I don't think you can have major questions or huge weaknesses looking at the Big 12 championship picture going into 2025 and come out on top. Because, BYU was in control of their own destiny coming down the stretch. They win the first 9 games, and then they lose a couple and just completely fade from the college football playoff discussion, which I'll ask you about in just a sec. But where are the areas that make you go, I don't know if they're at a place where they weren't in 2024?
Well, on defense, it's a cornerback, because when you lose a guy like Jacob Robinson, who's an all Big 12 guy, and then Mark Collins, who was very, very capable in his lone season as a grad transfer, you got to find 2 guys who can step up and be able to lock down opposing wide receivers, because if you can't slow anybody down in the passing game, that's a problem. So defensively, you got to look at that cornerback spot. On offense, my question is, can Jake Retzloff go from good to great? I consider him to be a good quarterback, Spencer, where he can get you. Yeah, he got to an 11-win season this year. That's good stuff. But as you mentioned, you win 9 games. You control your fate with regards to the Big 12 title game, college football playoff berth, all that stuff. And then you fade, as you mentioned, with 2 tough losses. And there were mistakes made by him in both of those games that absolutely crippled BYU's chances. So I look at it. If Jake Retzloff can take the leap from good to great, then BYU absolutely should have aspirations of being the Big 12 champion next year. But if he is only going to be as good as he was this past season, that may hold BYU back from really achieving their ultimate goal.
Did you feel like BYU should have gotten more playoff consideration than they did after a 10-2 campaign?
I do, but I also understand that when you lose at the juncture that BYU lost, that we're talking the last few weeks of the season, that's when the most eyeballs start looking at really how the field shapes up. And the College Football Playoff Committee, I thought they sent a message with the very first playoff rankings when they ranked BYU in the mid-teens there. And they were essentially forced to move BYU up after they kept winning. And then as soon as they lost, you saw the committee drop them like a stone right back into the back of the pack. So I look at BYU and say, yes, they probably should have gotten more consideration. But the sad fact of the matter is they lost at the wrong time of the year to really get back into the mix.
Yeah. But they did have a road win against a team that the committee had inside the top 10, because I was kind of lukewarm on it. And then when I thought about that, I went, I understand that they lost to Kansas, who didn't end up making a bowl game, but Alabama was going to be in the playoff with a loss to Vanderbilt if they hadn't lost again to Oklahoma. They were going to be in without question in that spot. If Ole Miss beats Florida, their loss to Kentucky doesn't matter. So I look at that, and I'm not a huge lean into the systems trying to screw this conference or that conference or whatnot. I know there are biases in certain places. I just don't think it's a stated mission of ESPN to hamstring the Big 12. But I do think that was an example. Again, I wouldn't have wanted BYU to be an at-large playoff team, but I wouldn't have expanded the playoff to 12 teams in the first place, of course. But I do think upon reflection, and yeah, the bowl game result against Colorado factors into this as well, because Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter both played in that game. Yeah, they should have gotten more of a discussion.
Well, and that's the thing about it is BYU wanted to make a statement. They did that with that bowl game because they got 8 million viewers that we're talking the who's who of college football were watching that game. And it's mainly because of Shedeur and Travis Hunter and Coach Prime, who obviously are on the opposing sideline. But BYU went out there and absolutely thoroughly smacked Colorado up and down the field. And I think they left the message for the College Football Playoff Committee that, yeah, we should have been considered a little more heavily. But I still look at it, Spencer. Yeah, the SMU game, it feels like they completely lost track of that game for whatever reason from the playoff committee's perspective. But in the end, to me, when you lose when you did for BYU, that took the luster off of, I think, what BYU's resume probably should have had on it.
I think it's because it was an ugly win and it was early in the season, even though it held up better than a lot of other wins early in the season did over time. Jake Hatch, Locked On BYU, always holds up well here on the show. Speaking of the Big 12, there's a quarterback who we talked about last year who was finally going to recapture the glory. Yeah, that didn't really happen. Can he find that glory somewhere else? I mean, I don't know. Let's find out anyway, shall we? First, this episode brought to you by PrizePicks, the place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings, PrizePicks has changed the game in daily fantasy sports. Whether it's the playoffs or the regular season, PrizePicks has made it easier than ever to win big while enjoying all the football action. Now, it's playoff time, and there's no better way to get in on the action than with PrizePicks. Here's how it works. You simply pick more or less on at least 2 players, and if your picks hit, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. That's right. 1,000 times your money just by making a few simple picks. So if you look at the NFL playoffs and say this guy's going to explode or that guy is going to tank, you pick more, you pick less than what his projection is, and boom, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. Ready to run your game this football season? Download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 just for playing with PrizePicks. Don't wait. Take your game to the next level with PrizePicks. PrizePicks, run your game. Cam Rising is the Dak Prescott contract of college football. JT Wistrcill, Locked on Utes, joining me here. It's because he is the story that will never go away, JT. Now, though, he has gone away from Utah, and he's not going to the NFL draft, or at least that's not what it looks like. Yeah, I don't know. But if you were a major college program in need of a quarterback, would you take a chance on Cam Rising?
Oh, would I take a chance on him? I guess I would consider taking a chance on him. Like, man, as a backup quarterback, like in theory, that could be intriguing, but I don't know what Cam wants to do. But Cam could not be Utah's option going forward. Also, you mentioned the Dak Prescott thing. I'm just happy there's not a $103 million dead cap hit with Cam Rising choosing to move on, which is what Dak's.
Though I imagine Utah's NIL collective perhaps feels it was a bit of a dead cap hit with the with just how the season played out. Now that's injury related, so that's different. But
Absolutely. I mean, I wonder when the point we'll get to, like when there is a guarantee in terms of NIL compensation, like we see that with NFL contracts. That feels
could be this fall.
Sure. Yeah, could be this fall.
Could be this fall. We'll see. But anyway, back to Cam.
Yeah, on to Cam. This is such a weird situation. I remember Utah, they're gearing up for the UCF game. Kyle Whittingham's last press conference, they was asked about Cam's future. And he was like, I've talked to Cam. He's going to announce his decision in like 7 to 10 days. Here we are on January 16th. We haven't heard from Cam. But we did finally hear from Kyle Whittingham because Utah was forced to make a move. They had to put out their spring 2025 roster. Cam Rising was not listed on that roster, so the reporters naturally asked Kyle Whittingham about it, and he says, I have talked to Cam a few times, and I'll let him divulge his plans, but he's no longer on our roster, and we'll let him announce what his plans are and what he wants to do. So what exactly does he want to do? Does he want to he didn't enter his name in the portal. Like, that never came about. So that's where, is he waiting until the spring one? Does he just not know still? He obviously, he still had another year of eligibility. Is he going to declare for the draft, even though he's not going to get drafted because his medical's so bad? But does he want to try to be signed as a UDFA? Does he just want to go into coaching? I have no idea what the future holds for Cam Rising. Spencer, I cannot ever remember a player's career starting, like when his playing career started, not all the weird transfer stuff even before, but when he got onto the field at Utah, 21-22. Special seasons, all-time great Utah football season, and he's a top 5 all-time Utah quarterback. But now how these 2 years have ended, it's insane. I can't remember anything ever like this.
Well, I think it's emblematic of something fans have to recognize, which is when you get a storybook ending or a nice, clean break between you and a beloved player, appreciate that, enjoy that, because sometimes it goes like this, and now the final taste in everybody's mouth. It's like Carmelo Anthony's basketball career. In his prime, in his heyday, it was great. He was really fun to watch, hitting big shots on Christmas Day and all that stuff. But the final impression anyone has of him was the old, washed up, coming off the bench, bouncing around. Like, that's just not...
Trailblazers Mello?
Yeah, Trailblazers Mello, who had his moments, but it was like, this is not how I want to remember this guy. And, I mean, that's a stark contrast to LeBron, who's 40 and is, I don't even know how to explain that guy. But I just look at Cam Rising and say, okay, to your point, the injuries notwithstanding, he's not an NFL quarterback, at least not, a highly regarded prospect. You add on the injuries, and undrafted free agents probably the best he could do. Now, I think he could be, good enough to make a roster somewhere. But maybe let's say he comes back to college football, and we're still waiting to see what happens here. The quarterback carousel is kind of mostly filled up. I do think there are maybe some group of 5 schools that are still looking for a quarterback that would say, we'll take your services over here? I mean, do you think he is still capable of being the guy who led a Power 5 team to a conference championship?
I don't, because unfortunately, I don't believe in his ability to stay healthy. I think we just have a large enough sample size, and I hate it for Cam. He was a great college football player with some of the things he was able to accomplish, and I just don't think we'll ever see that guy again. And I look back to the Arizona State game, like he comes back from the injury after getting shoved into the injury luck is awful. Shoved into a Gatorade cart and cutting his hand. Like, that's insane. That's what happened in the Baylor game. Comes back in the Arizona State game. Third play of the game, gets his ankle rolled up on and can't even put any pressure on it. And at the time, we're like, why did you leave him in the game? And then we saw Isaac Wilson play the rest of the season. It's like, okay, now I see why you left him in the game. But it's just, you can't bring in Cam Rising and say, like, this will be our guy. That's why when you talked about like a major program, like, this is just total speculation, but like if Miami was like, here's our backup quarterback, that's pretty nice to have a guy like Cam Rising who's led you to those heights to be your backup quarterback. But does Cam really want to be that? I don't think so. I really don't know what Cam wants to do. It would make a lot of sense to me if a Mountain West school did take a chance on him, but you better have a really good backup option. I wish Cam could stay healthy, but just this track record now and this just cycle we've been in of constant injuries, I don't see how he breaks out of it in 25 if he returns to college football.
He seems like a guy who could wind up on a football coaching staff somewhere very soon, yes. But maybe he pulls a Gardner Minshew and, he's going the coaching route, and then all of a sudden, boom, an offer comes about, and I think this is right for me, and revitalizes himself and gets back to what he once was. And I'm with you on the injury front. I just wouldn't be able to trust that he can stay, because it hasn't been the same injury even. I don't know if that's more concerning or less concerning, but it's a concern regardless that I don't see him for 2 years now. He has not been able to stay on the field, and that's a problem I don't know that anyone can overcome. But as for the transfer portal, JT, he'd be a graduate transfer, I presume, since he's been at Utah for so long. Graduate transfers.
7 years, he made it.
Yeah, I think he fits the bill for that classification of student athlete, but he'd be able to enter the portal at any time. And so if you're talking about the best quarterbacks that are still available, if a team suffers an injury in spring football, we might have this conversation again. I might just save this segment and then play it again on a show and save us the time of re-recording in the spring if a quarterback gets injured somewhere. But I'm with you that I don't think he would go somewhere to be a backup. I don't think he's necessarily above, though. If he doesn't have a super high NFL draft grade, why not go explore your options at insert group of 5 school that can push for a playoff spot? I know that UNLV's brought in their guy, but like schools like that where you go, hey, that could raise the profile a little bit.
And that's where I guess if I was someone close to Cam Rising, I would just ask him, is it worth it to keep going? Because I think then you're just continuing to put your body on the line, and more injuries you might have to deal with long term. And if that's something he wants to do, then I think you fully support him in that. But if I was someone close to Cam Rising, I'd have a serious conversation with him about that, because as you mentioned, Spencer, it's been different injuries: the hand, the ankle, the MCL, ACL that he suffered in the Rose Bowl. Like, it's been constant. And I do think that is just crazy, the point we're at in college football. By the way, the point you brought up is absolutely true. We could have star quarterbacks get hurt, and not as much right now, but maybe even in the future, like we'll have some quarterbacks who are going to sit back and be like, I'm going to wait and see if something better opens up in spring. Some guys do that a little bit, but they'll usually commit somewhere. And then maybe if they go through spring ball and they don't like it, but like the fact that can start happening in college football where a major quarterback might get hurt and they might think, oh, we could call Cam Rising. Like, that is a crazy sentence. And it's absolutely true. And to go back to what you said, I guess Cam is like Dak Prescott, because if that's the case, then you're right. I'm not done talking about it. We are always going to be talking about Cam Rising, because that could be, as soon as a star quarterback gets hurt, that might be what happens. And it makes sense to consider him. It's just very risky because of that health and injury history. And he just hasn't been able to stay healthy, as much as I did. I hate to say it, but like, look at the history. It's what it is.
Cam Rising, graduate assistant, University of Utah. I don't know. I could see it.
He's spent a lot of time on the sideline. Like, I'm not even trying to shade the guy. I'm just like, he's genuinely
he's got to be comfortable
constantly. Yeah. As a reliable voice, knows what it takes to be a quarterback there. That situation seems weird too. Just the fact that like that Witt either knows and just won't say, or like, why hasn't Cam come out and said? I can't remember a star quarterback like taking this long. So maybe there's just something going on behind the scenes. It's a very strange situation in Salt Lake, and we'll see how much longer it lingers.
JT Wistrcill, Locked On Utes. I will not make him linger here any longer. But this broken playoff format looks like it is lingering for another season. I wish we could fix it, but alas, college football is going to college football as hard as it has ever college footballed. At least we think. But first, we're going to talk about FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. If you want to bet the college football playoff national championship on Monday between Ohio State and Notre Dame, yeah, you can do that. If you want to bet the NFL playoff games this weekend, you can do that as well. Money line, point total, spread, it's all available there at FanDuel. They've got a bunch of great information for you to just poke around at the very least at FanDuel.com. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Get started with $300 in bonus bets at FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. The playoff changes that we want, that we deserve, that should take place, reportedly aren't going to arrive. Look, JT Wistrcill of Locked On Utes is still here. I lied when I said that he is not sticking around. He is indeed. But Heather Dinich reported on a talk show that there is not an expectation to get the unanimous agreement required to change the playoff format for 2025, which means we get another year of auto buys and auto bids for the 5 highest ranked conference champions, the 4 of whom which get the first round buys, whether that makes sense or not. And then we'll have this weird seeding system and whatnot. I'm disappointed, JT. I am not surprised. I'm not surprised we're not getting that outcome. I guess, though, there is a part of me that's still a little bit put off by the fact that there isn't unanimous agreement that the way that this 12-team playoff was seeded this year is wrong. That it was not the proper way to go about implementing a 12-team playoff. Why do you think there's no unanimous agreement on that?
I think it's pretty simple. Spencer, if you were the commissioner of the Big 12 or the commissioner of the ACC, would you vote to change it knowing you are guaranteed one of the top 4 seeds? Well, you're thinking about it. There's no way. Or Boise.
The ACC did not have one of the top seeds this year. The ACC champion was the last seed.
True.
In the playoff. Though I see your point. I don't know that was typical. I talked about Boise State yesterday on the show. I don't know if they're going to be at the same level. They've lost a few of their top receivers, Ashton Genty, Hassamani, their great defensive line. Like they're going to be at least a mild step back. But that doesn't mean you couldn't have another group of 5 that, notches a big Power 4 win or plays a game that carries them throughout the year like Boise's game against Oregon did. That's not impossible, but
I'll take my chances of that happening rather than if we just do it the other way. I know I'm not going to get one because they're going to throw the SEC or the Big Ten team there. I'm just talking about if I was the commissioner of the Big 12 or the ACC. There's no way I would want to change it right now. Yes, maybe I get more teams in, but they're going to be shoved down the rankings and it's going to be harder for them to make a run. And I think that's why I would still vote no as long as I could and want to probably keep this.
I see where you're coming from with that. And it makes plenty of sense. I just have this perennial Captain America level optimism in me that someone will start governing this sport with the best interests of the fans and the sport in mind. Mm-hmm. We're not getting that for 1 year. Now, these changes could arrive in 2026.
It sounds
according to what Dinich said. But that's honestly more infuriating. They're not committed to this model. They just don't want to change it right now, or they don't feel like they could get the if you want to guarantee that a conference champion gets into the playoff, I actually have no problem with that. I really don't. Because to me, the conference championship games have always been an extension of the regular season, which is what I value above all else, and why I didn't want to expand the playoff, because you minimize, I know you raised the importance of some other games, but you minimize a lot of major games, the conference championship games included. But that's where their priorities are by wanting to keep those auto bids. And at the same time, JT, everybody, including Dan Lanning, if you were being honest about it, would look back and say, should have lost the Big Ten championship game if you were Oregon, and the Ducks season might still be going right. I'm not going to play the hypothetical game, but you can't sit there and tell me that playing SMU at home and then Boise State in a neutral site is tougher opponents-wise than Ohio State on a neutral site with a super long layup. Like, that's what they're intending, is we want to keep the importance of the conference championship games, and yet in the structure you currently have, you just had a prime example where you punished a team for winning one because they had to play a team who you on your own rankings said is a better team than the teams that the loser got to face.
You're absolutely right, and I agree. Like, if it was up to me, I would fix the format, and I would make it be just the 4 best teams get those top seeds and those buys, and maybe even rearrange. This is what we're talking about. Like
16 playoff. Sorry, cost.
Yeah. This is where we want to rearrange it, because what you mentioned too, like Oregon shouldn't have to wait that long to play. I think that much of a layoff is a disadvantage rather than playing some of those other teams that you mentioned. But I, once again, go back to that's what we want to happen. But if I'm Brett Yormark, if I'm Jim Phillips, I want to protect the best interest of my schools. And as soon as we go to 16, that's going to automatically, yes, and Miami would have gotten in this year. But most years, that's going to mean more Big Ten. It's going to be more SEC. And it's also going to make my path, once again, just harder. I won't get a bye. I will have to play earlier. I may even have to go to someone. If I don't get, and if we rearrange it, then they might, first round, they might have to go on the road to someone else's house. So there could be a lot of year where the Big 12 and ACC champion, they have to go to the SEC and the Big 10, and then they're not moving on. So that's, once again, if I was those commissioners, I'd be doing everything I can to honestly try and keep the format as is. I personally, JT Wistrcill, want it to be a fair and equal. The best teams get placed in those spots. But if I was a member of those conferences and looking out for the best interest of my schools, I want this format to stand as long as it can.
Yeah, I think that is likely what it comes down to. If I had the ability to structure it how I see fit, I would make it go something like this, and I want your thoughts.
Okay.
Automatic bids to the 12-team playoff for the conference champions, no automatic seeds, no automatic buys. Those teams that earn the buys based on their ranking by the committee get home playoff games.
I like that.
The home teams went 4-0 in the playoff in this past season, when the first year that they expanded it, and the teams that had an incredibly long layoff went 0-4. That is not a coincidence. Now, there is a factor in there of Arizona State and Boise State were the lowest ranked teams, but they had buys because of the auto bids in there. But that's where I would start. Is, again, I want to incentivize the regular season. I want to incentivize the conference championship games, which is what the television network executives want, which is what conference commissioners want. I think that's what fans should want as well. So give me conference championship weekend, assess everything just as they did this past year. I thought they got it right with the 12 teams they put in, and say, here are the 4 most deserving teams of getting a home playoff game and a first round bye, but don't make those games 3 weeks from the last time everybody played a game. Make it 2 weeks after, or 10 days after, or what have you. That's where I would start with fixing the structure of this 12-team playoff.
I really like it. And once again, I feel like I have to say, like, what's going to end up preventing that idea from happening. There is no way that the companies that sponsor these bowl games are going to give up those second round games and say, like, no, you can't play them at a home site. I don't see that happening. I think they're going to want it to be the Peach Bowl played where.
How about the first round games are at the bowl games?
It's not as valuable. I mean, they'll still have it.
I think the viewership numbers are still strong, though, and it's still a college football playoff game. And you still have a college football playoff first round matchup at the Fiesta Bowl, the Orange Bowl, whatever. And it, as always, comes down to who's playing in the game. But that way, you don't disregard those contracts, but you give that home playoff incentive.
I want Ohio, but if I'm those brands, I want Ohio State, I want Oregon, I want Texas, I want Alabama. They're the best teams, and they get a home game instead of playing in my bowl game, where the viewership will be higher, where it generates more eyeballs and views for my company. That's just where I would say no. I like your idea. I think that is absolutely the case. What other format and what other bracket do we have where the best teams are denied a home game. Like, I don't remember that ever being the case. And that's where this is flawed. But there are so much politics going on in college sports right now. I think we even see some of them going on in the NFL with some of the coaching hiring and cycle stuff like the Dion thing, that it really is unfortunate that stuff gets in the way in what is not just best for the fans, but what is genuinely right, I believe, in the spirit of competition.
JT Wistrcill, Locked On Utes double segment today. Enjoyed it as always, my man. I appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.